Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Well, everyone is a special guest, but this special guest to me is just crazy, the connections of the world. So before we go in, I let this brother introduce himself. Keyword, I said brother, is that this gentleman knew my father growing up, knew him from Boy Scouts, as I believe. And, shout out to the 757 Hampton Roads, and their careers went different paths, but our paths, me and Brother Blake Morant, crossed again when he saw on Facebook a while ago. He said, "Oh, welcome, you crossed Alpha," and I said, "Yes, sir, I did." And we just started reconnecting, and it was like he was like, "I would have swore you would have been like your father and been a." And I said, I know I learned from my father, but sometimes, I got to make the best choices, for me. This is an amazing guest. He had a resounding career in law, was the dean of the law school at George Washington, George Washington University. Recently retired, I believe, or, recent to this podcast. And just had a wonderful career. And that's what I wanted to speak upon. But before we get into it, Brother Morant, did I leave anything out in that introduction that you would like the listeners to know about you?
I think you've covered it very thoroughly. I've got to say, Brother Wilkerson, to see you and to see how well you've done, you're an amazing individual. And knowing your father as I did, now I've got to say I'm a little younger than your dad. He's like the older brother. I've got to put that a little bit in. Yeah. But I've just got to say, seeing what you do, your energy, you're raising a family and doing so much to enrich the experiential levels of individuals that you are either in contact with or hear you. It is so huge, and it is very much necessary. I applaud you for that. I applaud you for being a brother of Alpha and having the good judgment to do that. I'm sorry, Father Phil, but I'm sorry. That's the way it is.
but it's great.
And we still love you.
Hey, we're all one family, especially, within the Divine Nine. We're all connected with all the mission to serve our communities and make this world better. And also as a space for a lot of young Black and females and males when they're going to college, as a space for them, right? So that's what, when it boils down to, that's what these fraternities are all about, fraternities and sororities. Absolutely. But going into you've had quite a prestigious career in law. So maybe talk back, we're going to go back to the beginnings of maybe, you going to school. When did you decide that law school was what you wanted to do?
So excellent question to begin, because a lot of people presuppose that I decided to do this because I either knew someone or this was my lifelong dream. Actually, it wasn't my lifelong dream. When I was in college, I did fairly well in subjects that seemed to suggest that I would do well in law school. So I wrote a senior thesis. I did very well on that. As you can tell, I don't mind talking, and that's a part of being lawyering. And then I just sort of put two and two together when I was in college and decided, lawyers do a variety of different things. Not only do they represent individuals and make sure that governments work and rule of law and justice is very important, but the historic function of lawyers has always been to figure out ways that you can always enrich society. And that, together with my performance in these courses in college, together with the encouragement that I received from professors when I was in college, all led to that decision. And I've got to say this, and your dad will amplify this fact. When he and I were young children in Hampton, Virginia, there was only one African-American private practitioner by the name of Al Smith. And Al Smith, in addition to trying to make a living doing the typical kinds of cases that you would have in torts and contracts and that type of thing, always took cases in civil rights. And he was one of the instrumental people on the front lines trying to make sure that African-American teachers were paid the same as majority teachers were, and all of these things. He paid a very heavy price for it politically, but he just did so much for the community. And he was a mentor for the Boy Scout troop that your dad and I were a part of.
Whoa, wow. No, I was about to say you pulled that together about that. And that's the Boy Scouts in the mentorship and seeing that as example.
Absolutely.
And that's quite a feat. I love that you pulled that together. So obviously, you know, my dad shares his stories of when he was going to flight school, being one of the few. That's where I actually met and got together with another fraternity brother of our fraternity brother, what's it called? Ray. Dang, I'm blanking on his name right now.
Sure.
Ray. But there was very few.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
So
and as I reflected, sorry to interrupt you, but as I reflected in college on what I was going to do, I remembered Al Smith. And so all of that contributed to me leaving college and going to law school.
And this fact check on my own is Uncle Ray Burden. That's the fraternity brother. But so speaking of, so where you go to law school, and maybe just speaking to that experience, you know, dealing with, like you said, you had one concrete example, but maybe bringing it to your experience. You know, did you have other Black males going through the program with you? Did you have a little cohort? Did you have some support? What was that experience like during the actual time of going to school?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, because I went to the University of Virginia for undergrad and stayed there for law school. And one of the things that's important to recognize is that I went to law school in the 70s. The University of Virginia was truly just integrating their law school during that time. I mean, there were people of color went to law school before the 70s, but it was just a trickle. But starting in the 70s is when the university or the law school itself really accelerated, bringing more people of color into law school. That being said, it was still just a very small number of us. So, for example, in my class of over 400, there were only 10 African Americans. 8 of them male, 2 were female. And as it would be for any institution that is just experiencing a new transformation in terms of its composition, there are always issues that were there. Professors who were not used to having people of color in their class, treating them differently, having the hierarchy of the school, questioning whether or not having integration in the school was a positive thing for them to do. But we as students banded together, and and I tell my students this today, there are always good souls in any particular place, regardless of color, who will bend over backwards to be helpful to individuals who really want to make a difference. And that was my experience. And so if somebody were to tell me was going through law school easy, absolutely not. It never is, even if you're not dealing with issues of difference. But when you are dealing with issues of difference, that is an additional layer of difficulty. And having allies there, having cohorts who help you, believe in you, and that you look at those cohorts regardless of race, that helps you to transcend a lot of those difficulties.
Now, during that time, I know, and I'm not going to keep on saying my dad during this podcast. This is your time.
Okay, that's all right.
You know, one of the things that I know that was, I guess, super impactful is that even when my dad was going through his what they call him the Leavenworth class, you know, that's Uncle Kip and all these guys, they stayed together. And then obviously kept each other accountable and stayed together for a lifetime. Did you meet some people like that in law school where it was like studying, accountability, keeping each other together, and then like it's almost like you have your own class, you celebrate, you randomly see them again over time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So first of all, since there was such a small number of students of color in the school, all of us knew each other and we're all very much supportive of one another. I also had students of the majority, my very dear friends who were also very supportive and also very much a part of the overall experience. And as I mentioned before, there were certain professors who were very much wedded to the idea that there should be difference in the school, that in a university concept, you've got to have that diversity in order to have the robust discussion of issues and all of that. And a number of those professors I've stayed in touch with ever since I was in law school. As a matter of fact, I would not have been in the legal academy today as a law professor who wasn't for one of those professors who recommended me for my very first professoriate, who is my idol and has been very helpful in all this. So all of that went together to really help navigate that experience.
So transitioning, right? Obviously, you know, I work in career services. So talk about the first, you know, big boy lawyer job. Like, how did that? How'd you get that first job out of law school, and how did you get connected? You know, whether it was networking or just, you know, how did you get that first job?
I love that question because every person's journey has a distinction to it. For my journey, I had a 4-year Army ROTC scholarship when I was in undergrad school. And that was really important for me in a number of different ways. One of the most substantial ways it was very important is that it practically paid for all of my undergraduate education. So in return, I owed the Army 4 years of active duty service. When I graduated undergrad, I asked the Army or requested to have a delay to go in so I could go ahead and go to law school. And they granted that delay. I was in law school for 3 years. So when I came out of law school, I owed the Army 4 years, and I applied and was admitted into the Army Judge Advocate General Corps. And I served in the Army for about 6.5 years when I came out of law school. And I've got to say, it was one of the most substantial and influential and personally satisfying professional experiences I've ever had.
Okay, then I just got to say why then. What was some of those things? that was already just tailing into my next question. I baited you definitely. You said, so I got to learn what was yes, like what was so impactful about the JAG program? Is it that's the JAG program?
See, I was hoping you'd ask that question. That's why I ended with it was one of the most important decisions.
Yeah. I had to go there.
I had to follow it up. So here it was, and I'm going to be very honest with you. Many of my classmates, when I was coming out of law school, were going into law firms and you know, high governmental positions and that type of thing. Very few, maybe one or two others other than I, were going into one of the military JAG programs. And so it was not emphasized when I was in law school. And so I kind of went in, not reluctantly, but feeling is that, okay, let me just do my duty and then get out and then really make my way in the world. But what I tell my students today, there's so many different paths, not only to your personal success, but also to the personal satisfaction that you get out of doing your particular job or your particular discipline. And for me, when I went into the JAG Corps, I was stationed down at Fort Bragg, the largest military installation in the world. So as a result, it had a very large legal office. As soon as I got there, the head of the legal office, who's a colonel, said to me, "Oh, Captain Morant, you seem like a very smart, bright guy, and I need a smart, bright guy to be my government contracts attorney. And because that's a very specialized field, it's somebody that we need who's very sharp, and we need somebody who's going to be here for a while." And so here it was, my very first job. I knew nothing about government contracts, but the man thought I was smart. Sure, sign me up. I'm going to do this. Yeah, absolutely. Didn't have any idea about it. It was an amazing experience. I was the government contracts attorney for all of Fort Bragg. The generals had to come through me to buy anything. So imagine a 26-year-old guy telling a 3-star general who dodged bullets in Vietnam that he couldn't buy a tank because he was going to use it in the area of the installation that interfered with the habitat of the red cockaded woodpecker. Wow. Only in the JAG Corps could you have had that. And so just to sum it up, I just had an amazing professional experience, great experience right off the bat. When I left that, I was brought up to the Pentagon. I recruited attorneys all over the country for the JAG Corps from the Pentagon. I then was at the Administrative Law Division so I just had great jobs working with wonderful people. And that really set me up for my post-military career.
So one of the things, I mean, there's two things that branched off of that. I think it's a lot of responsibility. I even kind of shuddered a little bit. Like, was that like at all intimidating? Like, I'm now putting myself in a 26-year-old shoes and saying, wow, like, and what was the learning curve like that? Like, because now it feels like for you to have such a high responsibility job, it was like almost like you had law school, but then it was like the internship portion, like you got to do some accelerated learning in your first job.
Oh my gosh.
Can you talk about that?
I'd be happy to. I was scared to death.
Yeah.
And particularly, let me tell you, when you are the government contracts attorney for a major installation and all of those major procurements come through your office, you have to check them very carefully because if you make a mistake, you, the attorney, could go to jail. And see, that's the part that the colonel who was head of the office never told me before I said yes to this job. So here it was, and it's a highly regulatory field. But I say this to my students all of the time. You never grow without having a challenge. And what you want to do is, with any challenge, not only do your homework and work very hard, but remember, there's always someone out there who knows more than you, that you should always never be reluctant to ask for help or assistance. And that's one of the things that I've done throughout my career. And so it was intimidating at first, but having had the great training, having had the belief of the superior in my office, and knowing that I can read and figure this out, but there are people I can go to and will willingly go to when I reach a roadblock, was very instrumental in my success.
Well, I think one of the things I want to pivot to is that, the military career, which is obviously gives a lot of people structure, and a lot of people probably, echo the same sentiments as you, like how it is a great place, for a young person to kind of get their career started. But I bet there was a lot of transition from the military to the private sector. And so can you speak to that transition when, your duty is done, you did a wonderful job, you're procuring all these contracts, but now it's like, okay, I'm going to explore the private sector. And what I would like to wonder with that exploration, did you have to figure out what kind of law did you want to do post military career? Like, because I know that you said civil rights and all those things. So where did you pivot to after that military career?
Sure, I'd be happy to say that. So one of the things I want to make clear, I left the JAG Corps not because I was dissatisfied or unhappy, quite the contrary. I was getting great positions, great jobs, working with terrific people. I got to a point where I had to make a decision. I had to decide, am I going to become a career military officer like your dad? Or am I going to branch out and do something else? And I got to a point where I realized, with the military, you've got to move around quite a bit. And I've had a career, and I made the decision, I really don't want to move around that much. And I respected her career and decided to leave. And now, one of the things that the military gave me was a huge expertise in government contract law, which is a big discipline, particularly up in Washington. So I left the Pentagon, joined a law firm up in Washington that did government contracts and construction litigation, and joined them for about 3 years, and then went into the general counsel's office of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, where I did their utility rate work that got all of the electricity to run the trains for them. And all of that, again, is based upon my experience when I was a JAG officer.
It's funny too, because I've noticed a trend that not once did you say that your career was driven by money. you didn't say I became a lawyer to make a lot of money. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's just me. Maybe I know it's a happenstance that money's involved, but I think that at the root, consistently was challenge and growing and military and service. So I guess, just randomly, what was if you can go back and, your overall overarching theme, what was your root of your why for that?
That's a wonderful question. And I think one for my generation is a bit easier to answer than someone, let's say, in your generation or younger. So for me, money wasn't, now let's be honest, we all want to do as much as we can to keep ourselves financially secure, right?
Mhm,
And we
mhm,
should do that. But it's not the overarching theme that drives me professionally.
mhm,
Because one of the things that I always tell people, if you are doing a job that you truly love doing, it's not work. And there are many jobs out there that'll pay you a lot of money, but you would hate doing what you're doing. Now, for some people, that's fine. They're willing to make that calculus and say,
mhm,
yeah, I hate doing what I'm doing, but I'm making all this money and that makes me happy. But I think for a lot of people, doing what you're doing, which occupies so much of your day, and to like doing that is really what fulfills you as a professional. And so, of course, I really wanted to make enough money to live and to support my family and that type of thing. But what drove me throughout my career is two fundamental things. Number one, am I going to really feel personally satisfied doing this job? And secondly, is it a job that's going to help me grow and help me to help others in some
mhm,
kind of way?
mhm.
And as a result of that calculus, I've been blessed enough to have worked in jobs that have made me financially secure. Now, I'm not wealthy, but I have been able to keep a roof over my head and feed and all of these types of things. So one of the things I tell students all the time, and this is particularly true for your generation,
Mhm.
Brother Wilkerson, is that law school and schooling is much more expensive now than it was when your dad and
Okay.
I were in
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
And so students graduate now with a considerable amount of debt, which is, I think, an issue that's going to have to be addressed by the political hierarchy. But
Mhm.
putting that on the shelf for a second, it makes a lot of sense for a student to be very concerned about how much money they're going to make when they leave school because they have all this debt to pay back. But one of the things that I tell them is, I'm not saying don't pay attention to that, but also put in that calculus what is going to be personally satisfying to me when I devote that much time to
Mhm.
those objectives. And putting those two together will hopefully get you to a place where you're going to be happy personally with your professional choices.
Yeah, and, it's funny. It's interesting too. Was I noticed a trend. You said you pivot with military, like I want to stay place, but I also noticed a trend with a lot of my lawyer friends. Shout out to A. Pollock, you know who he is. Is that
Oh, definitely.
eventually they transition to like where at the root of studying or practicing law is like they want to do something else with it.
Yeah.
And so whether they go into academia like you did, or like Abe, they went into the career center portion, they
Sure.
leave. And so like I'm gonna have Abe on here later to talk about his transition to his different spot of law. But like, why did you also pivot into becoming an educator? And I think that's
Okay.
what matches us, because I love to educate as well. I think that gives me fuel.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
what pivot your thing? I was like, y'all want to be an educator now. I want to teach the next generation. I want to do that because
I love that question. I'm so glad that you asked. And this fits squarely in what I just said about what gives you personal satisfaction and what are you doing that's really helping others and advancing others. And so when I left the JAG Corps and went to the law firm, and then I left the law firm and I went to the general counsel's office of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. When I took that job, I then worked in a more nine to five ish
Mhm,
type of environment. When I was with the law firm, I was working 24/7,
mhm,
right? But when I went to WMATA, my hours were more sort of 9 to 5. And I've always enjoyed teaching. I've always enjoyed it. When I was a JAG at Fort Bragg that I mentioned earlier,
mhm,
I taught business law for a college that offered classes for military service members on Fort Bragg
yeah,
installation.
mhm,
And I did that and I loved it. I mean, I just loved the sort of exchange and working with students and all that thing. So fast forward, I'm now at the Transit Authority and working 9 to 5. And American University's Law School was hiring adjunct professors.
mhm,
I applied, I got one of the positions, And for the whole time I was practicing law for the Transit Authority, I taught at night at American University's law school. And that did it for me. I really found my calling. I loved the discipline of teaching in a law school. I love the intellectual exchange. I love exploring ideas in the law. And that's when I knew this is what I have to do with my life. And that sort of marries with that point I made about what basically satisfies you personally in what you do. There's no part of being a law professor that I did not like. And so I applied nationally. My first professoriate was at the University of Toledo in Ohio.
I remember we talked about that.
Yeah, we talked about that. Never been to Ohio in my life. Never been to Toledo, Ohio in my life. But a great, great first experience as a law professor, and things just took off after that.
Now I know you. You kind of puffing up. You like grading papers. Like all that. Like, come on, we're talking about
Did
nothing.
you have to bring up that part?
No, you said nothing. I mean, I teach too, and I love the classroom part, and I feel like it's like getting on a little stage, and you know how we talk, you get a little audience, and I love that part. But ain't nothing fun about grading. I'll tell you that right now. If a teacher is that's BS. If a teacher says they love grading, then they just no one loves grading.
They're not telling the truth.
No, they're not telling the truth. But I know, when you see someone like as an educator, when you see someone actually click and they get an idea because you explained it correctly or explained it to them, that makes you feel like, wow, I can explain anything if they can get it. Or as an educator, I love that when they come back, like if someone's successful and they come back, you're like, wow, thank you. They call me Professor Wilkerson when I'm not even a professor, really. I teach I teach a career class, but I do feel you get fueled educating other people.
Absolutely.
I totally get that.
And notice how you said you get this spark when you're connecting with someone and they are learning something. There's something about, and that's that enrichment that you're giving to someone else. That is something that fulfills you as an individual. You're helping somebody else to get that spark of intellectual curiosity that hopefully they're going to take and do great things with. That motivated me to get to the grading part. I've got to say, you're absolutely right. As one of my colleagues said, that's where we really earn our money, is when you're doing that grading. And for me, so, I've been a dean at two national law schools for over 12 years. And now I am teaching for my career. And I went back into the classroom teaching at the University of California, Irvine, out in California, as a distinguished visitor. It's the first time I've taught a substantive course of any magnitude with a great number of students in over a decade. And so it was wonderfully exhilarating until I had 64 very thick blue books full of information to grade. But the key here, and this is for anyone out there who dreads the teaching, it's planning. You want to plan the evaluative mechanism well enough so that your grading is not too onerous. And I've gotten to that point now where I'm not going to say I enjoy it, but I get intellectual stimulation because I put a lot of thought into the questions that they're going to write about. And I also get this sort of curiosity about, well, are they going to see this the way I see it? And if they don't, why not? And that sort of helps me. But it's still where we earn our money.
So obviously your transition is very similar to a lot of teachers that become principals, right? Like eventually a teacher becomes a principal, so eventually you as a professor, you take the next level and become a dean. So what made you want to, take that step from a normal educator, and not say normal, but educator to an administrator? Where was that transition at?
So I'm so happy you asked that question, because I get that question quite a bit. I mean, people will ask me, when you became a law professor, was that your ambition? You become a law professor and then, I want to become a dean, and then I want to do this. It was never my ambition coming into the legal academy to become a dean. I mean, quite the contrary. I only wanted to be a law professor. It was the best job in the world. I get to teach these wonderfully bright students. I get to do writing in areas that truly interested and stimulated me. It gave me the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of individuals who are going to go into this profession where you are supposed to do as much as you could for the societies that you're in. I get to mold all of that with the students that I teach. That was going to be my ambition. And let me add, the very first year I was a law professor, very first year, the dean who hired me at the University of Toledo was excoriated and actually left that job after only 2 years. And part of it was because it is so difficult to manage the expectations of all of the constituency of a particular institution. You've got faculty, you've got students, you've got alumni, you've got the central administration of the university, you have the overall community where it all sits. All of those particular constituencies have their own agendae. And somehow you've got to advance the school without angering any one of those particular constituents. And it's impossible to do that job without angering one of them. And I saw that my first year as a professor. And I go, who would want that job? That's terrible. That's so hard. You have all these people angry at you. I would never do that job. But again, here's my teaching point for my students. You always keep yourself open to opportunities that are going to fulfill you. And for me, a school came to me and said, we see what you're trying to do. Think about becoming our dean. And I talked with them and I knew that wouldn't have been a good fit. But what it taught me was at the right place, I could do that job and actually enjoy it. And the right place came along and I ended up becoming a dean.
I love that. So one, what are some of the factors for right place? Because obviously right place can be transferable in lots of things. Like for instance, positive work environment, short commute, opportunities for growth. They go through the factors of satisfaction for someone at a job. So what were some of your check boxes? Like you said, if I was going to be a dean, I wanted some of these check boxes to be fulfilled.
Absolutely. So for me, and of course, these are personal choices, as you probably know. What satisfies me may not satisfy someone else. So you have to get a very good sense of what's important to you in terms of what you would like to see in the institutions that you go to, and whether or not you could be an accelerant of the positivity that goes into really helping those institutions. So that's my motivation. So to me, I was very much aware of what I thought legal education should do in order to be effective for students coming in. When I went to law school, it was considered the Stone Ages. And, at that point, most professors were very aloof from their students. Students were considered to be smart, but not certainly individuals on the level of the professors. And so the professors taught their classes and then they ran up to their offices doing their lofty things. They also engaged at my law school then, they engaged you in the intellectual discussion theoretically about the law, but they told you nothing about how that theory actually applied in the real world. When I became a law professor, I wanted to marry those two things. I wanted to marry the theory and also teach the students what they needed to keep in mind to translate that into professional success when they left the law school. I didn't have that in law school, but that was what I wanted to have. So the short answer to your question, I decided if I was going to be a dean, it would be at a school that believed in that kind of holistic education, that we're not only going to teach students the theory and the discipline of law as a discipline, and we need to teach them that, but we're also going to teach them to be the kind of professionals that they need to be when they leave and give them the tools to do that well. And then there are things such as fit, right? Is this a faculty that I bond with, that we click on some substantive level? And is this a place where the skill sets that I have can really help advance that institution? And so when Wake Forest came along, all of those boxes got checked. And it was a thrilling experience to be dean of that school.
Okay, so that's crazy. So Wake Forest, is that how you know Brother Gregory Parks?
Absolutely. I hired Gregory Park.
Okay. Okay, small world.
I was the dean who hired Brother Gregory
All right.
Parks at Wake Forest.
That's a small world. I'm about to send this episode to him when it's supposed
Please
to.
do that. And it was truly one of the most heartfelt hires I'd ever done, because he was sought after by many different law schools. And he and I clicked. Of course, he's a brother of Alpha. I think that really impressed him that this national law school had me as their dean, and we just clicked. And he's done very well. I'm very proud of him. And that's one of the changes that you can make in those positions where you can really influence an institution. So I'm very proud of his hire, and he's done very well.
So when you say those fit questions, which is, great. And we always, I work, in the career services, saying like, when you're getting interviewed, don't always, put them in the power seat. Like, you are looking at the employer, right? So was that ways that like you asked them questions? How did you, examine the fit of where you wanted to go when you were being interviewed, right? Obviously, did you ask them questions like, what do y'all, how'd you do that? What kind of questions did you ask the employer to evaluate for yourself whether they were a good fit or not?
That's a wonderful question. And I'm so glad you asked that. And I'm sure that you're trying to train your students to do that. The key I tell students about that, because usually when you're the administrator at an institution, that's something that you also train your students. I mean, you have to train your students. How are you able to sell yourself, for one, but at the same time, learn as much as you can about the place where you're applying, so that you can internalize whether or not this is going to be a good fit for you. And what I tell the students all the time is try to make sure the question is one that complements the fact that you know this institution. So I tell students all the time, learn as much as you can about the places where you're going to interview. And as you do that, you start formulating questions in your head about, wow, does this fit with who I am and what I do? And so, for example, when I was in the dean search at Wake Forest, I did my research on them. It's a law school that's relatively small. I believe in that. That really focuses in on not only being rigorous academically, but also making sure the students remember the pro humanitate label that comes with going from Wake Forest, which has to do with doing good out in society. And so I then studied the law school, and I said, now tell me something. I'm really impressed by your motto on pro humanitate. Tell me, how is that manifested throughout the teaching of your students? And what would you like to see in terms of someone coming in to enrich that particular mission that you have? And then they'll answer, and you can go, well, that really fits with some of the stuff that I was really thinking about. And here's some of the things I was really thinking about, which is pro humanitate. Would I be able to do? Oh, absolutely, because that's the kind of thing that we do. That's the way I tell my students. That can help you find out whether that institution is in lockstep with what you really want to do.
I love that because that's definitely what I say. Like, do your research, but ask questions. And I'm not saying code it, but ask questions like you want to get information as well, such as, like you say the mission statement, you say you have a commitment to diversity, inclusion, yada, yada. Can you explain some special, but not, you don't want to tell them to completely explain because you want to also know what they already do. But you can, I like that idea of I like that idea of bringing in ideas in your own interview. Like, would this be a place where I could try I'm gonna use that to think about and share that with students. Like doing your research, but bring ideas with you to the interview.
Absolutely.
Based on pre-existing, like, oh, I know that you already have a major event every year. Would this be an opportunity to do, maybe virtually or something like that? And
absolutely.
Like, wow, this person knows our events, but also they're coming with new ideas.
Absolutely. And see, one of the things, and I try to tell students this, and I know, students are just new at this, so it's not going to be intuitive. So what you have to do is really practice with them a bit. But the whole idea is to demonstrate that I've learned your institution, I've studied your institution, and I've also thought about it in terms of what some of my goals and ambitions are. And here's how they marry. And I think the way they marry is exactly what you're looking for and could actually help you to make your mission. That is an employer's dream. And I applaud you, Brother Wilkinson, for getting your students to understand that and to do that.
So this is one of my last. So now I know, and this is one of my last overall arching career questions. You are quite the writer, a remarkable writer. I love the articles. I'm gonna put a few articles in the show notes from Forbes. So one, how did you get connected with the brand? Everyone knows Forbes. How did you get connected with Forbes? And then how did you say, let me write on a variety of topics, because you don't just talk about law. You talk about, civil rights. You talk about just world events. How did that opportunity come about, and where that writing come about?
I really appreciate that compliment. It really touches me very deeply, and I think for me, I always, as I said before, I think anyone who's legally trained has a moral obligation to do as much as they can for the societies that they're in. And I've been blessed enough to have been in some very interesting positions. Those positions have given me a platform, whether it's been dean of a law school, president of the Association of American Law Schools, it's given me a platform. That means you have an opportunity to make statements that people will listen to and hopefully will inspire them to be their better, or to go with their better angels. And so I've always recognized that. I think while I was at GW, which is the third largest law school in the United States, and as president of the Association of American Law Schools, which I was while I was dean there, it gave me quite a platform. I was speaking nationally at a lot of different places about the importance of American legal education. I even spoke about it internationally. And my communication director came to me and said, you have a voice. I'd like to go out and find some other outlets that would be interested in hearing the things that you have to say. And so I credit her with bringing me together with Forbes, because she said, Forbes would love to have you as one of their thought leaders. You ought to think about doing this. And Forbes is a fairly decent kind of publication, Dee Morant. You really ought to think about this here. So I did, and I had done some writing with Huffington Post before I had done it with Forbes, but Huffington decided that they were not going to do individual blogging anymore. And so Forbes came on the platform and said we'd love to have Dean Morant. And that's how it came to be. And technically speaking, what Forbes does is it tries to put you in a category of writers. So with I being a legal academic, a dean, they said you ought to talk about law, academics, leadership, that type of thing. But you can recognize that's a pretty broad topic. And so for me, I decided to use it as a platform to merge the idea of how law is in the fabric of a civilized society, and that a civilized society has all kinds of issues going on, and that we as lawyers are there to really help people navigate all of those things. So hopefully you see that thread throughout my writings. The primary thing I try to write about is professionalism and civility, that somehow civility has been lost as a norm, not only in discourse, but the way people behave in a variety of different places. And we need more people emphasizing that importance if we're going to not only get along, but get people to understand.
I love that. So I lied. That was not our last question. This is the last segment of my show. I call it shot for shot, meaning you get to ask me any random question, not even on this topic, and I get to ask you any random question. Do you want to go first, or I go first? Yes.
Okay. May I go first? Okay. So there's a pink elephant in the room, right, Brother Wilkinson? There's a pink elephant in the room. We just saw a cataclysmic moment in our democracy last Wednesday, where individuals who had a contrary belief with regard to the election decided to bring their beliefs and frustrations to the nation's capital. I think it's a seminal moment in our democracy
Oh, I
right
don't know.
now. And so my question to you is, where do we go from here? Given given what happened on Wednesday, and I recognize, it's a fairly deep, broad question, and I don't expect you to give, precise answers to this. This is much more of an opinion piece, but everybody is thinking about this, and I'd be very curious to find
Well, I'll
out
be
what
totally
are some of
transparent.
your
Some of
uppermost
the
thoughts
first initial
in the
thoughts
aftermath
was
of what
that
happened on
we
Wednesday.
still have a lot of work to dismantle racial inequality and white supremacy. Because the first thing I thought about when they stormed it was that only a group of white men could do that. Like, not even close could a group of black men even. I saw a video where a guy said a group of 6 black men wearing suits didn't even make it to the first step, but a mob of white people wearing magma hats could storm it. So I think my initial thought was, regardless of bipartisanship, regardless of politics, we still have a lot of work in racial inequality, systemic racism, and just, fairness. I think you said civility and talking about across the aisle, and like I say, not bipartisanship, but there's just still a very basic inequality, that someone that can, I believe, an insurrection or treason can go in and actually walk out, and some of these people probably will never get arrested because they don't know everyone that went in, and go about their normal day to day. Like, I just can't fathom committing a level of crime of breaking into a federal building and just walking out, no handcuffs, nothing. And so I'd say that was the most blaring thing that stood out to me, is that regardless of politics, regardless of the ideology that Trump has, magnified with his tweets and his words, is that baseline, regardless of politics, there's still a lot of work to be done in regards to anti-racism, fairness, equality, just how we view people, how we treat people. And, that also, I would say, our leaders of our nation need to really heed that the words they say, when they say, oh, I didn't really tell them explicitly to do that, that even the smallest words could be dissected and mean power. Jump, and you'll never know. If you're a leader and you say jump, somewhere out there, someone's going to jump. Like, and and they didn't say like jump off a cliff, but but you say jump, and someone's not listening. They're near a cliff, they're going to jump off a cliff. You got to really realize that to the T, every word that you say holds power. Like, you don't have to explicitly say jump off a cliff, but the word jump can invoke an action in someone else. So I think those are the things that blatantly stood out to me with that event, was words have power, and that we also have a lot of work to do in regards to racism.
And that's a wonderful response, and there's a lot that can be teased out of that goes beyond the time period we have here. Let me say, and I've had a lot of my friends and colleagues have echoed the very same thing that you have, and I agree that we really do need to address systemic racism in this country if we're going to go forward. Going back through the thread of the stuff that I've written about in terms of civility and professionalism, if you think about what's happened, a lot of it has threads of the lack of civility and professionalism that I've been talking about. Truth, appreciating the truth, appreciating facts, disagreeing in a way that is civil, that recognizing in a complex democracy, we're going to have differences of opinion, but how you express those opinions and how you react to those opinions will have a manifest impact on how society can move forward in a positive and productive way. All of that points to the lack of civility that we're seeing in our society today. Think about this at a fundamental level. If truth were a universally held postulate for anyone in a professional position. If that were true, and that was held by everyone in a powerful position, would we have seen what we saw on Wednesday? So at a certain fundamental level, and this is the thing that I've grappled with ever since, not only Wednesday, but even before then, this sort of casual relationship that individuals have had with truth, the casual relationship people have had with decorum, of being in a certain place and acting as one should in terms of courtesy, respect, of openness. Those things have no longer become salient elements of how we engage until we get a universal buy-in that, hey, we're going to have disagreements. We're going to have differences. This country was built on that. I mean, that's the whole idea, right, of a complex democracy. There are going to be people on this side, that side, whatever. We all come together. We express ourselves in a way so we can hear each other. We have a vote where everyone's vote counts. And then the majority speaks. And we have compromise. Not everybody wins everything, but not everybody loses everything. I mean, that's what a complex democracy is about. And we need to get people to understand that, to appreciate it.
I think
and
the one thing that you spoke upon before
so
I
that
asked my
if we
random question of
do,
you was
at
that
a very
I think
fundamental
a lot
level,
of people,
it could avoid what had happened.
And, you know, this podcast is going to come out a little bit later, but still we're referencing, if you think you're listening to this podcast, we're referencing the storming of the Capitol, is that I think a lot of people don't believe in, you know, whether it's bipartisanship or whatever, that civil discourse is existing. This is quite polarizing, and I think it's really hard to, you know, leaning left, right, whatever, is that I think the polarization, there's even whole think tanks and stuff, like how do we break down this polarization and really see each other in thoughts and truth and facts and information sharing. So definitely that's something that I'm going to ponder, and maybe we'll have to do a part 2, just talking about straight civility, because that's something we can dive deep into, because I know, you know, a lot of people are jaded about even getting into politics. You know, like why would I want to be a civil servant when, you know, maybe they don't have the best interests, and when we need people that are thought leaders to be our servant leader, you know, be involved in politics. We need diversity in politics. We can go a whole range of that, but I think there's a big distrust there, and I think you spoke to that. There, people don't trust that there is true compromise. You know, that people don't trust that, you know, when they vote, it matters. You know, absolutely. I like that word trust. I think that there's a lot of distrust, and I think that the country, similar to, you know, someone in an abusive relationship, you know, when they get into that next relationship, it's not going to just be like, oh, we're in a new relationship, everything's good. It's got to build, you know, you got to build up trust. You know, like you're jaded by that ex-partner, and you go into a new relationship still bringing in that baggage from the past relationship. So I think that, you know, a lot of people vote and say, oh, it's a new president, but we don't realize that we're bringing in a trauma, that not everything is going to snap and there's a lot of distrust on both sides. And so I think that trust is going to need to be rebuilt. The trust in the system is going to need to be rebuilt.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. And absolutely. And you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think our leaders need to have that as a fundamental construct of how they conduct business, and to emphasize that to their constituency. If we could get that, it could go a long way into healing what we have. Because what has been hugely disappointing to me, a number of people in high leadership positions who have been very casual about truth and information. And I think if we could get an agreement that we will appreciate the truth, appreciate facts, and base our arguments on those two factors, it could go a long way to healing us. The tribalism part is going to take us another session to really deal with. But I think those
So
two,
this is my random question
that
to
one
you.
fundamental construct that I
You
told
lived
you
in
about
multiple pockets
has
of the
to
United
be at
States.
the fulcrum
You
of
traveled the
anything we
world.
do to heal this society.
Let's say, you know, you get to make your own new law school. Like you get to build it. Let's even call it this the Blake Morant School of Law. The School of Law. So this is a dream school. Like, and when I say a dream school, meaning we're not going to focus on the classes you teach, but we're going to talk about the location. Where would this dream school be located? What would it look like? Maybe even we could talk about the architecture. What would the buildings look like? Would it be like modern looking funky buildings, or would it be like old school castle looking building? So that's it. That's my random question for you. The Blake Morant School of Law. Where would the school be located?
Okay. Oh Lord.
Oh, too late. Oh man.
Well, we would first start that we would not name it after Blake Morant. That would be my first thing. First thing foremost, it would not have that name. So let me just basically say, one of the silver linings behind what higher education has had to deal with during this pandemic is the appreciation of education in an alternate space other than live. And I think one of the things, and I've said this, and I still believe it, I think higher education has been fundamentally changed by this situation. Now, this does not mean that live education is gone. Quite the contrary. And I'm one of the proponents of this. We need to, particularly in an undergraduate setting, have an educational module which allows students to come together to learn from one another, because learning in college is holistic. You're not only learning what you get in those classrooms, but by being with these people from different places, different thoughts, different walks of life, that is an essential part of the educational dynamic as much as it is the doctrinal stuff that you get in classrooms. So we need that. And you need that at that point in an individual development, because for me and for so many other people, going to college is the bridge to adulthood. You leave your parents' homes, you're now on your own to a large extent, and you're learning about what the world is kind of like in a much more idyllic setting. That is an essential part of the college experience. It was for me. As you know, your father and I grew up in this hamlet of Hampton, and my whole sort of universe was that. Going to college opened me up to the wide expanse of the wonders of this world in terms of different places, different people, different walks of life. I had friends of all different types. It has been an enriching part of my life that I've continued, and that came from college. That cannot be replicated online. But having said that, there needs to be an appreciation for reaching individuals who cannot afford or do that, or who are older and have done that already. So not Blake Morant School, but the new school.
I was like, this dude hit me with the lawyer. You found a loophole in my question. Come on, man.
And so as a result of that, Brother Blake said, the building is not going to be as important. The school would take place
by the beach.
Right? I mean,
I was hoping some kind of answer like that. This is it. My school will be the law school I have will be all over the world. I was. Yeah.
Well, now let me just simply say, in that law school, it's got to be global, because we're in a global market now, right? You know, quite frankly, and I tell students this all the time, that's why diversity is so important in school, because you're not going to go out there and go into this little cocoon and do your professional work. You've got to be comfortable with working with, bargaining with, persuading a variety of different people. So your educational experience should be as reflective of that as possible. So this new school is going to take that approach. It's going to allow students the opportunity to commune with students from other different places, all over the place, allow students to travel, allow students to understand that even though there are a lot of differences in this world, most people have commonalities that bond us together. I will never forget when I was at Wake Forest and I had dinner with the great Dr. Maya Angelou. And Brother Wilkinson, it was one of the most unbelievable experiences of my professional career to be in the company of this woman who cooked dinner for us and to hear her talk and regale us in her stories. And one of the ones that she said that I quote to this day to innumerable audiences, we have a lot of differences among us, but many more fundamental commonalities, but we tend to focus so much on our differences. And when I heard her say that, I said, my God, that is absolutely true. What can we do to educate people on those fundamental commonalities? We need to expose them more to different people so that they see those fundamental commonalities and not fear.
So basically, it's online, and also you'll have multiple campuses all over the world that you could travel.
Focus its curriculum and education,
one in Dubai,
education around that particular theory.
Travel, that'd be dope.
Well, let's say I may not be able to afford to have multiple campuses, but we could formulate a program of education where students can travel. Because so think about this. If you've got a strong online platform, students can be in Bangkok, Thailand, and still take a course here. My God, I was teaching when I was teaching my course in administrative law for the University of California, Irvine. And I was doing that online. My students were all over the place. I had students in Mexico. I had students in Canada. I had students in Irvine. I had students in New York. They were all
I would say online, but there's nothing like physical space. So it would be that combination. I think moving forward, hybridish. Well, this has been a wonderful show. I mean, we might have to do part 2. I mean, we got so much to talk about. So this is the part of the show called shout outs and plugs. So shout outs means show love to anyone you want to show love to. Show, shout them out. And then plugs could be anything that you want the listeners. I'd love to. The Forbes magazine's post. Anything that you want them to follow up with you or get connected with you, link, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. So the platform is yours. Shout outs and plugs.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, if I want to,
that's not okay. That's you better do that one.
My shout out. If I can cheat a little bit, I got to give a shout out to my wonderful wife, Paulette Morant, who is. And to your wonderful wife, Maggie, who has been so patient putting up with this guy with so many ideas all the time, right? And I'm the same way. My wife has a great degree of patience and has been hugely supportive. And I could not have accomplished what I've accomplished in my professional life without her. So I give a shout out to her. I do want to give a shout out to your dad. And I want to tell you why. Because your dad, along with Aaron Wade Smith. I don't know if your dad's ever told you about Aaron Wade Smith. The three of us were Eagle Scouts together as Boy Scouts. And Aaron Wade and your dad were the same age. I was about three or 4 years younger than they. So if you ever see a picture of us getting the Eagle Scout Award, you've got, a 16 or 17-year-old, you got this 14-year-old, then you have this other 17-year-old. And I was the little kid. But even though I was a little kid, I was like their little brother. And growing up as an only child, having them as my big brothers who treated me like that was hugely instrumental in me having the kind of camaraderie that we talked about at the very beginning of this program. And I've told you this. Your dad came from a family that's quite remarkable. I remember your grandfather very well, who died when your dad was really very young. But I remember Mr. Wilkerson like yesterday. Your grandmother as well. They were remarkable people, and your dad has taken that along. Your dad knows Attorney Alfred Smith that I spoke about before, who mentored our troop. That your dad didn't treat me as this throwaway little kid, but as a co-brother, really taught me the meaning of brotherhood. And so I give him a shout out as well. The plug, please read my blogs on Forbes. That's one plug. I'm working, the last blog I did was a very emotional one. It's one about my friendship with Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And that particular blog was one of the hardest ones I've had to write, because she was a friend of both Paulette, my wife's, and mine. But if you read that, you're going to see a side of her you never thought existed before. So I want to give it a plug like that, so to make sure that you read it. And hopefully I'm going to do some more forthcoming. My next blog, I'm going to try to not necessarily address what happened on Wednesday, but talk more about the importance of truth and a buy-in on truth sort of going forward. And so I want to plug that. And at the end, give people hope. I mean, people should recognize that this country's trajectory has never been just a constant upward trajectory. There have always been bumps and bruisers in this democracy. But at the end of the day, we've always come out with a better understanding of who we are and what we need to do to become, as they say, a more perfect union. And hopefully
that's quite remarkable. This has been one of my favorite. I think it's going to be one of my personal favorite episodes.
What has been
I'm not talking gas. I mean, I think so many things
in
that
our
we
nation
can touch upon, especially knowing that we can have a lot of conversations later about other things too. So I really appreciate you taking your time. Thank you so much for your support. I probably hear my kids in the background. But everyone that's listening, please follow along, listen to Brother Blake Morant's words. They're very powerful. He's been quite a leader. He still continues to be a leader. And, it's just, this is also one of those things where I know that life, everything happens for a reason. The greater thing of Alpha brought us together again. And it was just great to see, the people that my father surrounded himself with as a child grow up and be great leaders. And that kind of inspires me about my childhood friends too, and seeing where we can go. And we having those stories and us shouting at each other's out, and me looking at, my friends' kids and saying, how your dad was and all that stuff. So I think this is just great for me. This is one of those times where podcasting for me fills me up and it's an opportunity for me to learn on my side. But for all the listeners listening, please follow along, like all the articles, listen to Positive Philter, share this episode with your family and friends. If you have a question for the podcast, it's 571-336-6560. That's 571-336-6560. Spreading positivity is a movement, and we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Philter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity a Movement. Thanks for listening.